Late 1945, a Pacific island shrouded in mist and mud. The war had ended, but fear still lived in the eyes of 19 Japanese women stepping off a transport truck into an American prisoner of war camp. Aiko Tanaka clutched a dented music box to her chest, her knuckles white. She had been told Americans were monsters who would use women like her. The propaganda posters had been clear. But then something strange happened. A sign went up in Japanese. "No soldier may touch prisoners. Report violations immediately." An MP turned away a curious GI at the fence. Orders are orders. Medical checks were done only by female nurses. Soap was handed out freely. Names were recorded, not numbers. These weren't the brutal captors she'd been warned about. These men kept their hands at their sides and their distance. For women who had been told they'd face the worst, this impossible restraint changed everything. If you want to hear more untold stories from history that challenge everything you thought you knew, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. It's amazing to see how far these forgotten stories can travel. The floodlights cut through the Pacific dusk like searchlights hunting for enemy planes, casting harsh white circles across the muddy compound. Aiko Tanaka pressed her spine against the wooden slats of the transport truck, her fingers wrapped around the dented music box that had somehow survived the last terrible months. 19 other women huddled beside her, their faces pale as rice paper in the artificial glare. The truck lurched to a stop with a grinding of brakes that made several women flinch. Out. Everyone out. The American soldier's voice was firm but not cruel. ICO's legs trembled as she stepped down into the mud, her thin canvas shoes immediately soaking through. The barbed wire stretched in neat rows under the lights, and beyond it she could see low wooden buildings that looked like barracks. Everything smelled of diesel fuel and wet earth and something else, something clean and sharp that she couldn't place. Sergeant Thomas Reed wiped his hands on a towel and surveyed the medical tent he'd just finished setting up. At 34, he'd seen enough wounded men to know that healing started with simple things: clean instruments, steady hands, and clear rules. He picked up a piece of chalk and wrote in block letters on the small blackboard, "No touching, nurse present." The carbolic smell of disinfectant filled the canvas space, mixing with distant sounds of American soldiers calling out baseball scores from somewhere beyond the wire. Reed stepped outside and watched the women being led toward the processing area. Their eyes darted everywhere like birds expecting a trap. He'd read their files. Comfort women, the reports called them, though the clinical term couldn't capture what that really meant. These women had been told stories about American soldiers. He was sure of that. Reed tucked the towel into his belt and reminded himself that his hands would stay visible at all times. Kenji Sato adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and opened the folder containing the camp regulations. At 26, he'd spent the war translating between two worlds that often seemed to speak different languages, even when using the same words. His parents were in an internment camp in California, and some nights he wondered if the irony of his position would ever stop cutting so deep. But today, looking at these frightened women, he knew his job was simple: make the rules clear. "You are prisoners of war," he began in careful Japanese, his voice carrying across the small group. "You will be treated according to the Geneva Convention rules. No American soldier is permitted to touch you. If anyone violates this rule, you must report it immediately." The women glanced at each other with expressions Kenji recognized: confusion mixed with disbelief. Everything they'd been told about Americans was being contradicted by his first sentences. A young woman with intelligent eyes and careful hands stepped closer. She was clutching something small against her chest. "What did they tell you would happen here?" Kenji asked gently. ICO's voice came out smaller than she intended. "They said you would hurt us. They said American soldiers were beasts who would stop, unable to finish." Kenji nodded slowly. "I understand what you were told. What I'm telling you now is different. The truth is different." Lieutenant Ruth Hale appeared at the processing station with an armload of supplies and the no-nonsense bearing of someone accustomed to being obeyed. At 28, she'd learned that dignity was often the first casualty in places like this, and her job was to make sure it didn't happen on her watch. She began distributing soap, plain cotton dresses, and thin towels to each woman. "Medical inspections will be conducted by female personnel only," she announced, then glanced at Kenji. "Please translate that." When she noticed a curious American GI approaching the wire fence, she gave him a look that could freeze engine oil. "Private, you have duties elsewhere." The soldier retreated immediately. The Japanese women watched this exchange with something approaching wonder. An American woman had just protected them from an American man. Aiko accepted the soap and dress from the stern-faced nurse, then looked back at Kenji. "Now what am I?" she whispered. Kenji typed her name carefully on a small card. Iko Tanaka. "Now," he said, "you are exactly what this says. A person with a name." The mess hall smelled of bacon grease and something sweet that Aiko couldn't identify. She sat at the long wooden table with her tin plate, staring at the thick slices of canned peaches floating in syrup like golden half-moons. The American food looked so rich, so abundant, that her stomach clenched with an old weariness. Beside her, Sumiko Mori poked at a strip of bacon with her fork. "American fruit is loud," Sumiko whispered, watching the syrup drip. When a drop splashed onto the table, she let out a quiet laugh that surprised them both. The sound was so unexpected, so normal, that several other women turned to look. For a moment, the mess hall felt less like a prison and more like a strange sort of breakfast gathering. Iko lifted a piece of peach to her mouth, then stopped. Her throat had closed up. The sweetness was too much, too sudden. After months of thin girl and fear, she sat down the fork and pressed her hands flat against the table until the moment passed. Kenji moved through the registration line with methodical patience, his typewriter keys clicking steadily. Each woman stepped forward when her turn came, and each time he asked the same question, "What is your full name?" When they answered, he typed it carefully on a small white card, then slid it across the desk. "Micho Hayashi," said a woman with graying hair and steady eyes. Kenji typed the characters, then handed her the card. "You are more than a numbered here, Hayashi-san." He opened a Red Cross form and positioned it under his pen. "Would you like to send a letter home?" Micho stared at the blank form as if it might disappear. "They will let us write letters. The Red Cross will deliver them," Kenji confirmed. "It may take time, but they will try to find your family." She nodded slowly and took the form with trembling fingers. Reed set up his medical station with the same careful attention he'd given to field hospitals in 3 different Pacific theaters. Clean white sheets stretched over the examination table, instruments arranged by size, and the small chalkboard positioned where everyone could see his rules. When the first woman entered the tent, he kept his hands visible on the table and spoke to Kenji rather than directly to her. "Please tell her I need to check for injuries and illness," Reed said. "Lieutenant Hale will conduct the examination. I will only observe and provide medical advice," Kenji translated. And the woman, barely 18, with scared rabbit eyes, looked between Reed and the female nurse with confusion. "She wants to know why you won't examine her yourself," Kenji said. Reed met her gaze briefly, then looked away. "Because that's not how we do things here. Tell her that in this camp, her body belongs to her, no one else." When Kenji translated this, the young woman's eyes filled with tears. The afternoon work details were announced with the same careful structure that governed everything in the camp. Laundry duty, kitchen help, sewing repairs for uniforms and linens. Each job came with posted wages, credits that could be used at the small canteen for soap, tea, writing paper, or hard candy. Iko found herself assigned to the sewing station, where American uniforms arrived with torn seams and missing buttons. The work was familiar, and her hands moved steadily with needle and thread, while her mind tried to process the strangeness of being paid for labor. Sumiko worked beside her, humming softly under her breath. In the late afternoon, they were led to a wooden building that had been converted into a classroom. Chalkboards lined the walls, and simple English phrases were written in neat script. "Good morning, thank you, please help me." Lieutenant Hale stood at the front with a patient expression and a pointer. "Today, we learned baseball," she announced through Kenji's translation. The lesson that followed was unlike anything Aiko had expected. Lieutenant Hale drew a diamond on the chalkboard and explained the rules with the seriousness of a military briefing. When she said, "Steal second base," Iko raised her hand with concern. "Is stealing not against the law here?" she asked. Kenji grinned, the first real smile Aiko had seen from him. "Not that kind of stealing from Naka-san. It means running very fast to the next base while the other team isn't paying attention." The absurdity of it struck her suddenly. Sitting in an American prison camp, learning about a game where stealing was encouraged and running in circles was the point. Despite everything, she found herself almost smiling back. Aiko sat at the small wooden table in the letter-writing area, her pen hovering over the red cross, stationary like a bird, afraid to land. The words she wanted to write seemed too large, too impossible to fit on such a small piece of paper. Around her, other women bent over their own letters with varying degrees of concentration and tears. She began with the simplest truth: I am alive. The characters looked strange under her pen after so many months of silence. The Americans did not touch us. We have soap. She paused, thinking of how her mother would read these words, how they might sound like lies, given everything the newspapers had said about enemy soldiers. But they weren't lies. They were the most important truth she had ever written. For the first time and longer than she could remember, Aiko signed her full name at the bottom of the letter. The ink dried slowly in the humid Pacific air. Kenji was reviewing supply requisitions when Private Brooks approached his desk. With the nervous energy of someone carrying bad news, the young soldier kept glancing toward the fence line where the Japanese women were hanging laundry to dry. Sarge Reed wants to see you, Brooks said. There's been some talk, rumors going around outside the wire. Kenji set down his pen carefully. What kind of rumors? Someone dropped leaflets near the perimeter? Japanese writing said American soldiers were using women at night, and that the whole hands-off thing was just for show during the day. The familiar weight of propaganda settled on Kenji's shoulders. He'd spent the warfighting rumors that moved faster than artillery shells and did just as much damage. Who's spreading this? Word, is it S? Coming from the male P compound that Lieutenant Nakamura S been talking to his men about shame and honor? You know the type. Kenji knew exactly the type. Men who preferred comfortable lies to uncomfortable truths, who would rather maintain their version of reality than admit they'd been wrong about their enemies. What does Captain Briggs want to do about it? Nothing official yet, but he's worried. Says one breach of protocol could undermine the whole repatriation program. The evening air carried the smell of cooking rice and the distant sound of American soldiers playing cards in their barracks. Aiko walked the perimeter path with Sumiko, staying well inside the boundaries marked by white-painted stones. The freedom to walk, even within limits, still felt like a luxury. They were approaching the eastern fence when they saw him, a young GI standing just outside the wire holding a Hershey bar toward them through the chain links. His face was earnest, almost pleading. "Hey, miss," he called softly. "You want some chocolate? American chocolate." Aiko stopped walking. The chocolate looked impossibly rich, wrapped in brown paper with letters she couldn't read. For a moment, she was tempted by the simple kindness of the gesture. Then she heard boots on gravel. Private Brooks. The MP's voice cut through the evening air like a whip crack. "Step away from the fence now." The young soldier turned, his face flushing red. "I was just being friendly, Sergeant. I just wanted to share some orders." "Our orders, son. No gifts, no trades, no contact through the fence. You know better." Reed appeared from the medical tent, drawn by the commotion. He walked to where Brooks stood with slumped shoulders and spoke quietly. "Eddie, I know you mean well, but that line isn't just paint on the ground. It's a promise we made to these women. You cross it, even with good intentions, and you break that promise." Aiko watched the entire exchange from 20 feet away, her heart hammering in her chest. The American soldiers were actually enforcing their own rules. The MP wasn't pretending for her benefit. He genuinely turned away his own countrymen to protect her dignity. That night, as rain drummed against the barracks roof, Aiko lay on her narrow cot, listening to the gentle breathing of sleeping women around her. She reached under her pillow and pulled out the dented music box, winding it carefully in the darkness. The melody that emerged was thin and wavering, but pure. One by one, the other women began to hum along. Sumiko's voice joined the tune, then Michiko's, then others. For a few minutes, the barracks filled with something that sounded almost like home. Not the home they'd lost, but perhaps a home they might still find. Outside, the rain continued falling, washing the dust from the compound and making everything clean. Captain Briggs stood in his office with the crumpled leaflet spread across his desk, the Japanese characters looking like angry scratches in the lamplight. Kenji had translated the propaganda with clinical precision, but the message was clear enough. American soldiers were violating the women at night. The hands-off policy was theater for inspectors, and honor demanded that true Japanese resist cooperation with their captors' lies. "How many of these got distributed?" Briggs asked, rubbing his temples where a headache was building. Intelligence thinks maybe 50 or 60 dropped around the perimeter in the native village, Kenji replied. Order is exactly how we demonstrate that the rumor is false. That's what I told them. But if this gets back to Washington with the wrong spin, the conversation was interrupted by shouting from the direction of the main gate. Both men hurried outside to see a crowd forming near the fence that separated the male and female compounds. Several Japanese P officers were gesturing angrily while American MPs tried to maintain order. Lieutenant Nakamura's voice carried above the rest, his English sharp with accusation. You bring shame to these women by keeping them like pets. Better to die with honor than live as Americans' playthings. One of his men picked up a stone and hurled it toward the women's barracks. It struck the wooden wall with a hollow thunk, sending several women scrambling for cover behind the building. An MP raised his rifle and fired a warning shot into the air. The crack of the gunshot seemed to freeze everyone in place. Aiko crouched behind the barracks with her heart racing, the familiar terror flooding back like cold water. The peace she had been building stone by careful stone crumbled in an instant. These were the sounds she remembered. Angry men shouting, women hiding, the promise of violence hanging in the air like smoke. Lieutenant Hale appeared with a clipboard and a face like granite. She walked deliberately through the compound, posting new notices in both English and Japanese. Roll call every 2 hours. No gatherings of more than 5 women. All classes suspended pending review. Report any unusual contact immediately. The Japanese text was particularly stark against the white paper. The rules have not changed. American personnel will maintain appropriate distance. Violations will be reported and punished. Reed found Aiko in the medical tent later that evening, attempting to treat a small cut on her hand that she'd gotten while rushing to safety. Her fingers shook as she tried to clean the wound with a damp cloth. "Let me help with that," Reed said, then stopped himself. He stepped back and called for Lieutenant Hale. "Could you handle the bandaging? I'll talk her through it." Hale took over the wound care with efficient gentleness while Reed kept up a steady stream of conversation about anything except the afternoon's chaos. Back home in Ohio, my boy Danny would get cuts like this climbing apple trees. His mother would patch him up, and I'd tell him stories about my grandfather's farm. Had the sweetest corn you ever tasted, and bacon so good it made you want to cry. Despite herself, Aiko found her breathing slowing as Reed's voice continued. The man was talking about breakfast foods as if they were precious memories, and somehow that made the world feel less dangerous. "Why do you talk about bacon so much?" she asked through Kenji's translation. Reed smiled. "Because it's something good that's waiting for all of us when this is over. Something simple and normal and worth going home for." But the fragile sense of security continued to crack. That evening, ECO's letter was returned with a stamp that read, "Add address unknown. Building destroyed." She stared at the envelope until the words blurred, then reached for her music box. The spring had finally snapped completely, and the melody died halfway through the first phrase. She held the broken toy in her hands and felt the weight of everything collapsing around her. "Maybe the rumor becomes the truth," she whispered to Sue. Kenji sat across from Captain Briggs in the command office as rain drummed relentlessly outside, turning the compound into a muddy maze. The typed proposal lay between them, a public statement where the women would give sworn testimony at the weekly assembly in front of witnesses from both compounds. Briggs leaned back, leather creaking under his weight. "Nakamura will call it coercion," he said. Kenji met his gaze steadily. "Which is exactly why it has to be voluntary, sir. The women choose whether to participate. They choose what to say. We just provide the platform." He paused, "but I think they're ready to tell the truth. They just need to know someone will listen." The morning of the assembly dawned gray and wet. Aiko stood in the barracks staring at the typed page with her name spelled out in careful English letters. Statement of Aiko Tanaka, age 19, Hiroshima Prefecture. Her hands trembled as she read the simple words she had dictated the day before. "You don't have to do this," Sumiko said quietly. "No one would blame you for staying silent." Aiko folded the paper carefully. "I've been silent long enough. It didn't protect me then, and it won't protect anyone now. The assembly area filled slowly. American personnel occupied wooden benches under one awning, while Japanese POW representatives, including Lieutenant Nakamura with his coldly skeptical expression, sat under another. Captain Briggs called the gathering to order. This assembly is convened to record testimony regarding conditions in the women's detention facility. Participation is voluntary. Iko walked to the front, the typed statement clutched in her hands. She had never spoken before so many people, and had never imagined her voice might matter. "My name is Aiko Tanaka," she began in Japanese, her voice barely audible above the rain. "We were told Americans would harm us. They did not. They gave us soap and recorded our names. No soldier has touched us without permission." She paused, looking directly at Lieutenant Nakamura. "Some people say this is a lie. Some people say we are being used in secret. I am here to say that is not true." Kenji translated each sentence into English, his voice carrying clearly across the assembly. "The rules posted in our compound are the rules that have been followed. American hands have stayed at American sides. Our dignity has been protected. This is what I swear to be true." The typewriter keys clicked steadily as the stenographer recorded every word. When Aiko finished speaking, the silence stretched long enough for everyone to hear the rain pattering against. The canvas and the distant sound of the ocean beyond the wire